Thank you very much for that really nice introduction, and thank you for all showing up after lunch. Yeah, thank you. Today I'm going to talk about accessible exams, but don't worry, the stuff that I'm going to talk about should be relevant to all PDFs, and particularly PDF forms as well, so it's not just exam specific. But a lot of the issues that have come up over the last 3 years or so from making exam papers accessible in the UK may very well be of interest to you all. Okay. Exam papers are essentially forms, whether you are taking the exam as a piece of paper with a pen or whether it's online in a PDF or any other format. So I'm going to be talking a lot about forms. What I'm not going to be talking about is the basics of how to tag or build a form. But what I do want to talk about is a couple of issues that I think don't usually get the kind of coverage that they should. One of those is content and the problems of inaccessible content. And another issue I want to talk about is the need, certainly in the context of exams, and I think elsewhere, of going beyond standard tagging techniques and beyond screen reader accessibility in order screen reader accessibility in order to make PDFs accessible. And the reason I say that is certainly in the context of exams, the vast majority of children taking exam papers using assistive technologies are not screen reader users. It's actually fewer than 3% are actually screen reader users. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the issues that come up for users of other assistive technologies and things that you might need to be aware of in that context. And then lastly, I'll just talk a little bit about how I think things might go in the future and the possible issues. Hang on, we seem to have lost. Oh, there we go. The way things might go in the future. All three of these topics are actually interrelated in ways that you might not imagine, but I'll try and string them all together at the end as well. Okay, my first, I'm sorry, I've skipped through a couple of slides here. My key takeaway number one is that I think it's important that PDF accessibility professionals should not be the passive recipients of whatever content that content authors deem fit to throw at them. I think we have a really important role to play in educating content authors how to avoid the sort of traps that they so often fall into. And I'm going to give you some examples. I've actually picked out 5 from exam papers, but as I say, they do generalise to other types of PDF as well. I could have picked out 100 if I wanted to. If we had all day to talk about it, I could have picked out at least 100 similar kind of ones. But I hope they'll give you a good indication of how things can go wrong for screen readers, screen magnifier users, and for people, for example, dyslexic people who might use what are collectively known as literacy software solutions. I'll show you some of the potential horrors as we go. So my second point is it's vital to go beyond screen reader accessibility. Dyslexic people outnumber blind people by about 10 to 1. The numbers taking exam papers are even higher than that, and considerably higher than that. I agree completely with the issues or the points that several of the speakers have made yesterday and today, that it is really important that assistive technology manufacturers come on board with standards like PDF UA and that they do build their products so that they read tags because their products will be a lot more usable if they did. However, I will actually cite a couple of examples towards the end where even that will not solve all of the problems that are out there. and other solutions will need to be found to accommodate those non-screen reader users. And I'll just talk briefly about the challenges that PDF might face from other technologies in the future and what it might need to do in order to meet those challenges. Okay, let's get straight on to the topic of content. In my view of the world, you don't make websites accessible, you make the content accessible. The C in WCAG stands for content, and in my view, exactly the same thing is true of PDF. In respect to exam papers, I would say that, I've got an estimate here on the second bullet point that around 25% of all questions that turn up in exam papers actually have problems with the content itself. On reflection, I would say that's actually quite a serious underestimate. I would say it's considerably more than 25% of the content actually is inaccessible to one extent or another. And I'm going to give you some examples in a moment. The good news is that most of them are relatively easy to fix if you know what to do, if you know what they are, and if you can have that conversation with examiners. Okay, the first example is a fairly obvious one, but I'm going to include it anyway because there are a couple of other issues around it. This is a typical front page of an exam paper. There are a couple of fields, form fields at the top for candidates to put their name and candidate number and so forth in, then a title, a bit of general information, and then a set of instructions. Now, I don't know if everyone can see, okay, all the way back there, but the first instruction that a candidate gets in a digital paper is use black ink or ballpoint pen. It's really, really obvious when it's pointed out, but if you give an instruction to a child taking an exam that they cannot meet straight away, you've got a problem. Now, if the person taking this exam is using a screen reader, you can, to some extent, get around that problem, because you could just replace that text with actual text, or text if you want, of something like enter your answers into the form fields provided, and that's what a screen reader user would hear. However, you need to be aware that if you do that kind of thing, other assistive technology users will be disadvantaged. For example, Zoom Text Reader will just skip over that text and just ignore it altogether. Magic, likewise, the other main screen magnifier that works with JAWS, and the two main literacy software solutions that people in the UK use. I'm sure there will be different versions or different types of software for different language area, but in the UK, the two main literacy software solutions are called Read and Write Gold and Claro Read. One of them will skip over it altogether and not read the alt text. The other one will read it out, but it won't put in the normal highlighting that you would expect to see if you're a dyslexic person. So most of the ATs used by children in the exam room would not read it correctly if you've replaced a piece of text with actual text or whatever, and you need to be aware of that. Everything I've said has been on the assumption that you cannot change the content on the page, but the fact is you have to drop that assumption. You cannot accept that content, it has to go. So that conversation needs to be had with the people who are creating the content. They need to understand why they can't do that. Okay, that's my first example. The next one is maybe not quite so obvious, and my apologies if you've seen this before. I did actually mention this example in an interview prior to this conference, so apologies if you're seeing it for a second time. But this is an example of quite a common form of wording for a question in an exam paper, and it's just it's as follows: a cuboid has ... faces. Okay. Now, I'm sure that people who put these exam papers together have a huge amount of experience and knowledge in their academic areas, and I wouldn't sort of denigrate them in any way in that respect. However, I'm not sure that there's that much awareness that when you're creating an exam paper, you are creating a form. And in the last 20 years, an awful lot of research has gone into understanding what does and what does not constitute a good form, and that doesn't do it. That tells me straight away that the people who put this content together have not investigated the do's and don'ts of form building. Forms were never designed to do that kind of job. I liken it to trying to eat your spaghetti with a spanner. The tool is just not designed for the job, and the outcome is probably going to be an awful lot of sauce down your shirt front. And that is what you get when you listen to something like that in a screen reader. Jaws, for example, would read out that question as something like, a keyboard has, edit, number of faces, type in text, faces. Right, that is just a mess. And it just takes a really long time to work out what it means and what to do with it. And when you're in a time-limited environment, especially when your life chances might depend on understanding it quickly, that is a major, major problem. However, just change the wording to how many faces does a keyboard have and put the form field after it, and it just works out of the box. In that case, the screen reader would just read out how many faces does a keyboard have, edit, type in text. In other words, question, form field with a prompt, what to do with it. Problem solved. It's that easy. And you haven't changed the meaning or the intent of the question at all. I can give you any number of similar examples of badly worded questions, but I won't because we're on very limited time. However, I will, that one is a problem that particularly will be a problem for a screen reader user. I want to give you an example now of one that will be particularly problematic for a screen magnifier user, which is this. When I train people in how to make accessible forms, the first thing that we talk about is the page layout and how to and how not to lay out form fields on a page. And one of the first diagrams that I will show them is that, which is the least efficient way of laying out a form of all. Its characteristics, of course, are that all the labels or the questions are left aligned down the left margin, and all the form fields are right aligned. Okay, this is a problem for everybody. It's by far the slowest design for everybody to use. So, sighted people included, eye tracking tests have shown over and over that this kind of thing slows people down, understanding which label relates to which field, etc. So it's a problem for everyone. But it's particularly a problem for a screen magnifier user because of all the space in between. And I'm going to show you in a moment exactly how much of a problem it actually is. Now, some people might be sitting in the audience thinking, who would design something as ugly and clumsy as that? Well, you'd be surprised, because that is a standard exam layout with the label on the left and the form field over on the right. Except that is actually worse than what I showed you, because not only have you got the horizontal gap, you've also got a vertical gap between the question and the answer. And I'm not showing an extreme case here, I'm showing quite a mild case. I don't usually show extreme examples to make a point, although I will make an exception to that rule in just a moment. This is certainly not an extreme case. Sometimes you get a question right at the top of the page and the answer field right at the bottom. So it could be 4 or 5 times that much gap. I will show you in just a moment how much of a problem it actually is. I could fire up Zoom Text or Magic, which are the two main screen magnifiers. I won't now because they're very slow to load and we're on limited time. But you can just take my word for it that both of those screen magnifiers allow the users to magnify a page up to times 36. Okay? I'm not going to show you what it looks like at times 36. I'm going to show you what it looks like at times 6, a relatively modest screen magnification. It looks like this. Here you can just see the last letter of the question, and you can just see down the bottom right-hand corner the beginning of the answer field. Again, this kind of thing will slow users down tremendously. The impact is absolutely enormous trying to find where you need to go to type in your answer. Again, the solution is dead simple and it's so easy to do. The optimal way to lay out the form is to left align your questions, left align your labels, left align your fields directly underneath, and the problem just goes away for everybody. There is no issue. Okay, the next example I'm going to show you, I will be fairly brief about because I'm going to try not to duplicate too much what other speakers have said before, but this morning Ferraz made the point very, very well, I thought, about alt text is the job of the content author. It's not the job of the PDF accessibility person at the end. I think it's fine for the PDF accessibility person to have editorial input and guidance, but I won't go on too much about it. Context is often very important, and also sometimes you just simply do not have the expertise to write appropriate content. I said I don't usually use extreme examples, but I am going to use one in this case just to sort of really hammer home the point. This is from a chemistry paper. Okay? The question here is the monomer of the addition polymer polypropanol may be represented as CH subscript 3 baseline minus CH equals CHOH. The repeat unit of the additional polymer is option A, option B, option C, option D. Right. What somebody's got to do here is to write alt text that describes each of those images, but they do it in a way that does not give a screen reader user an advantage over a sighted user, but doesn't disadvantage them either. Now, I don't know if anybody in this audience fancies having a go at this. Maybe we'll have a little competition if we have enough time. But I suspect not, unless there are any chemistry professors in the ranks here. Certainly not something I would have a go at. And I consider myself to be an English editor before anything else, before any kind of accessibility work or anything. I'm quite happy to draft text and edit it and all the rest of it. But with this, obviously, we draw a line. Now, in this case, I just rang up the chemistry professor and said, if you were in a classroom and you had to ask this question of a class without the use of any visual aids at all, how would you do it? In other words, if you have to do it in words, how would you do it? And he was really up for it. He was really keen to play the game. And just for fun, I'll tell you what he came up with. Option A is propan 1-OL with the continuation bonds on the first and second carbon atoms. Obvious, really, isn't it? Option B, propan 2-OL with the continuation bonds on the second and third atoms, and so on. Okay, this is just, I know it's an extreme case, but I think we really do need to hammer home this idea that it is not the job of the PDF accessibility professional to write alt text. It really should be supplied at source. Okay, my last content item is, or example, is this one. And I've included this because it's a good example, I think, of content authors not being aware or perhaps not being clear about what they're actually testing for. This actually requires the user to draw a graph on a grid. And the only thing that is provided is just a grid like that and the question. And the question is, draw the graph of y equals 2x plus 3 for values of -2 to 2. So, what exactly is being tested for here? Well, several things actually. Mostly, you're being asked to solve an equation for various values of x and come up with a series of coordinates. That's the bulk of the problem. And if that were the case, all you need to do to make that accessible is to provide a text field next to it into which somebody can actually do the calculations and come up with those coordinates. If that is the aptitude that is being tested for, then the examiners need to tell the PDF accessibility person a text field needs to be provided here to solve this problem. However, if you've actually got to draw a graph, well, one, it assumes you're using a pen and paper, for example, but you are also testing for, or at least I'm sure the examiners are not aware of the fact that they are actually testing for whether or not you have sight, and they are testing for whether or not you have the motor ability to actually pick up a pen and do it. And I'm sure that if they were made aware of those facts, then you wouldn't get questions in this format, which is why, just to reiterate one more time, the conversation needs to be had between PDF accessibility professionals, or just accessibility professionals in general, and content providers. As I say, I could have come up with at least 100 other examples, but I hope that gives you some idea of where I'm coming from. Okay, I want to move on to my second point now, which concerns using other assistive technologies and going beyond standard tagging techniques and beyond the PDF UA compliance. I fully agree with all of the speakers on PDF UA compliance, but except I would say I think it's a necessary condition. I don't think it's a sufficient condition for making documents accessible, especially in a, if I may say so, a sort of mission-critical environment like exams, where somebody's life chances could actually depend on the outcome. Okay, this is a paper, well, I'm about to show you a paper actually in a moment, which has been run through the Axis PDF Quick Fix checker. Wonderful tool, plug, but it really is. I have no interest in it, by the way, it's just a great tool. I have no commercial interest in it, I mean. Yeah, PDF Axis Quick Fix has just run a check on this, and there are no, certainly the automated check shows no PDF problems at all. If I were to check this paper with a screen reader, either JAWS or NVDA, there would also be no problem with it at all. It just works. Okay? Absolutely no issues at all. However, if you bear with me a moment, I will just get up the actual PDF and show you how it can go wrong. Right. In a moment, I'm going to run a program called Read and Write Gold, which is used by about 44% of all children in exams in the UK. So it is a significant piece of equipment. What we will find is that it will ignore the sentence there, use evidence from the extract to support your answer, the one below A, will just be completely skipped. And also, this entire content block from there down to there will also be ignored. Let me just run that for you, and you can see what I'm talking about. I'll just fast forward it if it will let me. Oh, hang on, I don't know about the audio. Sorry, I've got the audio. Is that it?
Romeo, I thought all for the best, mind you should, or I shall faint, and plague over both your houses. They have made worms meat of me.
Oh, okay. Because that's come out. There we go. Cable slightly too short, but there you go. Right, I think we're there now. Thanks.
exit, support.
Okay, so it's this line here, and this whole block here that we're getting this. I'll just show you.
Romeo and Juliet. One answer all parts of the question. From the extract, what do you learn about the character of Mercutio? 7. B. Using your understanding of the extract, explain how the following lines might be performed. You may consider the following in your answer. Actions. Positioning.
Okay. This is not a reading order problem. Okay, it's not hiding somewhere. The actual problem is that when the PDF was generated, in the content panel, you have some spans. Can you see that okay? We've got a container span, and inside that, you have a nested container P paragraph, and that's what causes the problem. And those are the sort of issues that I have to check papers for to make them work. Now, I can see a couple of technical heads sort of thinking about that one. I have no idea. I'm not a techie, I'm a content person. But those kind of issues turn up all the time. Okay? And also, I mean, they're not the only problems you get with Read My God. You'll get reading order problems. Those reading order problems would be solved if maybe that kind of problem would be solved as well if those assistive technologies read the tags. As I say, not all problems will be solved, and I'll give you an example in a moment. I'll show you something else that can go wrong with Read My God as well, which is this. This is a very surprising one. It's not something that you can get rid of by artifacting. I'll run, let me just forward it a little bit.
Error 2 and plus B, H.
Right. When this flips from one page to the next, you're going to get probably the PDF equivalent of the Northern Lights. You're only going to get it for a couple of seconds, so you have to not blink for a moment. I'll just run it now and you'll see.
A, H. Volume of prism equals area of cross-section x length. Length, cross-section, exemplar draft. Read turnover, answer all questions. Write your answers in the spaces provided.
Thank you. You get the idea. Now, no amount of artifacting is going to stop that kind of thing from happening. Again, if the assistive technology manufacturers followed the tags, problems like that would probably disappear. But the fact is, right now they don't. And until they can be persuaded, harangued, or whatever, it's as well to be aware that these kind of problems can turn up. Okay. Right. I just want to show you one other example of something for which there is no obvious fix, even if the assistive technology users, manufacturers did play ball, which is this. Now, normally you would just handle a bar chart like this by tagging it as a figure and adding alt text to it. Probably a description of the layout and the type of chart it is, a summary of the trends and the patterns, the relationships, the anomalies, etc., and then the data values, and that would all go into your alt text of your image. However, that really is not any use to a dyslexic person. A dyslexic person who can see the page doesn't need all that information, and it's actually a disadvantage having to make them sit there and listen to it all. What a dyslexic person wants is the labels read out and highlighted. And I'll show you how that works as well.
5. Laura draws a bar chart to show the different blood groups of 50 people. 25, 20, 15, 10, 5, 0, A, B, O, and I. Label the axes on the bar chart.
Right, that is what a dyslexic person needs. Now, things like that might actually be one of the reasons why the people who make these software packages might be reluctant to make the switch. And some kind of solution to a problem like that would need to be found. And there may be others, but that's probably one of the most obvious ones. Right. Okay, let's get back to my section name. Presentation. I think I must skip a few pages because I had some screenshots of what I've just shown you. Okay. Just going to wrap up with just a few words about where things might go in the future. Certainly MathML would be fantastic, and I know that Olaf is talking about that later on this afternoon, so I won't go into that in any detail other than to say that it would be most welcome and can't come a day too soon. What I think is probably important to note, though, is that one of the shortcomings of PDF, I think, as things currently stand, is that for people with low vision, the most important issue of all is access to typographic style. Okay, and this is the kind of stuff that other formats like EPUB just do out of the box. When you go to an EPUB, you can choose the font you want, you can change the line height, the line length, the font size, and the colour. Now PDF can do some of that, but some of it can't. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges it faces. The reason it can't is the problem of reflowing a form, which, or at least some of those issues. PDF forms just don't reflow at the moment, therefore you cannot have that kind of control. Colour-wise, things are getting okay. Adobe recently fixed the background colour bug that's been in there for years and years and years. I blogged about it back in July, and it was fixed about 2 or 3 weeks later. I'm not sure whether the two are related or not, but it was fixed. So now you can change and customise font colours and background colours. Most of the time, it works except when you have transparent images on the page where you still have problems. And the other things that would be great to have in terms of having access to typographic style obviously would be the ability to choose your own font and also line height. And I think that is possibly where the biggest challenge comes from to PDF from other technologies. I think there are some subject areas that might be better in other formats anyway. I think chemistry is the one that comes most readily to mind. Making a chemistry paper accessible in a PDF is a challenge, to say the least. But the good news is that most of it can be done really, really easily if you get the content right and you get the tagging right, as a lot of other people have spoken about in the last day and a half or so. Then nearly all of these things can be done and done to an extremely high standard, but you do need to go a little bit further beyond the screen reader and standard tagging to get there. And I guess that's me wrapped up. I'm happy to take any questions if you have them. So, do we have any questions for Tim? I'm off the hook. Any comments?
What do you think, Ted? Are PDFs really the best choice for the Excel papers, or?
I think it's too early to say. I think they've got a lot going for them. There's a lot of advantages, and I could, the fact that PDFs are used for the printed copy anyway means that they have a big head start in the field. But yeah, it's really, really easy to get something like an English paper or a history paper that's just a few questions and large answer fields or something. You can make that accessible very, very quickly to most people. Caveat, the access to typographic style, which could be better. But apart from that, it's a really quick, easy way to work. I'm not sure that any other format at the moment would be quicker, it might be as quick. In an ideal world, I can see an XML database with all the content in it, just sending it out to different formats as required. I think we might be a few years away from achieving that though. Because I think ideally, that actually might be a question for the candidate as well, because there might be one candidate who prefers to have it in a PDF and somebody else who actually would get on better if it was in some other file format as well. So having that flexibility I think would be fantastic, but how we get to that point from here, I don't know. No, probably people in this room have a much better idea of how you might do that than I do.
How often would you encounter this nested containers issue?
1 in 10 papers.
Okay.
But I do get the papers from different sources. They all come from different people. Some people reuse templates and have done for years. You know, I don't know what their history is of. You know, I think people build all kinds of problems on top of problems, and you know, when you use Axe's quick fix PDF to delete all the empty containers, you'll end up with a grid of pink squares on top of everything. And you get all kinds of nice artistic effects like that out of these papers as well.
I mean, if you're, I can explain to you why this happens at one point if you want, and how to address it as well.
I'd love to know what the fix was. It's like, if it's not me manually having to take it out.
No.
Okay. As I say, there are people in this room who have much more depth of technical knowledge than I do. I'm very much a content person and then user person. So. Further questions?
I think it's more a comment, it's the things Association of the Blind. It should not be done for the blind, but if it is the best way to do it for any other disabled people, then it's nice to know that it could be handled by a screen reader too. But I think the important thing is, as it is with examinations and so on, it should be done as smooth for any disabled. And if this is better for other disabled people, then it can be handled still with a screen reader too. That's fine.
Other questions?
So, thank you again, Tim.
Thank you. Very welcome. Thank you for having me.